what is the goal of NCRI?
The NCRI is a political coalition which seeks to establish a secular, democratic, pluralistic Iran. The NCRI has a president-elect called Madam Maryam Rajavi, who is a Muslim woman, who is profoundly anti-fundamentalist. She has a 10-point plan for future Iran. This 10-point plan very much articulates what kind of a future Iran we envision to have. An Iran which there will be a separation of church and state. The religion would not be an issue for privilege or discrimination. It would be an Iran which will be democratic, and the ballot box would be the ultimate arbiter. An Iran that there will be gender equality. Actually, to put this into the context, NCRI, as the parliament in exile of the Iranian resistance, has more than 500 members, and 51% of the members of the NCRI are women, which is indicative of the type of Iran we envision to have, that this equality of men and women would be in practice in all levels, particularly when it comes to decision-making positions. We envision an Iran which there would not be death penalty. We believe in abolishment of death penalty. We believe in a non-nuclear Iran. We believe in mutual, amicable, amiable relationship with the rest of the world. We believe in full autonomy for the Kurdish region of Iran. And we believe in market economy. So this is the kind of Iran that we envision to have, and that's what we are striving for. An Iran which will be adherent in practice to the spirit and the text of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So there would be freedom of association, freedom of expression. Basically, freedom would be enshrined in the future of Iran. That's the future of Iran that we believe in and we are striving for. The NCRI has offices the world over. Its main headquarters is in Auvers-sur-Oise, in suburbs of Paris, but it has offices in London, Washington, Brussels, Oslo, Stockholm, Rome, and many major capitals of the world, and support groups the world over. It enjoys a very extensive support among diaspora. The core member organization of the NCRI is called the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, which has a vast support network inside the country.
Okay, fine. What we know actually, that before I think 1979, in the 70s and 60s, Iran was quite different from what it is right now. And you are talking about the women and the equality of women and men. Do you plan to have an Iran which it actually was originally?
No, actually, we want to have an Iran that would be. Okay. There is no notion of going back. The notion is to go forward. What we had in Iran before, under the Shah, was a dictatorship, a monarchy system, which obviously the Iranian people, with their mass uprising and their historical uprising, booted out. So that was rejected in its entirety by the Iranian people, and that's not going to come back. At the same time, we are anti-mullahs. We are anti the regime which is currently in Iran, which is basically a theocratic state, which gives absolute rule to the supreme leader, which is quote-unquote a religious figure, who is, in our view, actually has nothing to do with Islam. So in a nutshell, we are anti-Shah, anti-Mullah. We want, because none of them have any resemblance of democracy. One of them was a modern democracy, the other one is a medieval tyranny. So we want a modern democracy. So we want to propel Iran to a modern times, modern age. And that's what the Iranian people have been striving for and have been resisting for. And actually there has been an ongoing resistance and a struggle in Iran from the very first years of the ascension of the mullahs to the power, because they believe in religious fundamentalism and Islamic extremism, and that's what the Iranian people despise and loathe and have been fighting against.
Your organization has got a lot of support from around the world. Um, as far as I know, it has got support from Italy, it has got support from other European countries, and maybe from South Asia also. How does that change? Does that help your cause?
You see, the main support for our movement is actually inside Iran. Uh, Actually, this movement is based on a very, very extensive popular support among Iranians inside and the diaspora outside of Iran, who see this movement as the hope to get rid of the mullahs, get rid of this medieval tyranny and establish democracy. Over the course of the past 35 years that the People's Mujahideen of Iran has been resisting, and the NCRI as the political body has been active against the mullahs, more than 120,000 of the activists of the People's Mujahideen of Iran have been executed in Iran in the past 35 years. 120,000 people, young men and women. This is a book that includes and has documented 20,000 of these victims with great details for every single one of them, with names and pictures. So, and this is only 1/6 of the total number of those who have been executed in Iran for the cause of freedom and democracy and human rights. So the main base of support for the Iranian resistance is actually inside Iran. And that's how this resistance has been able to survive and progress. And that's how it has made it the number one challenger of the mullahs and the mullahs' number one concern. Now, so far as the international community is concerned, the Iranian resistance enjoys very extensive support among in the parliaments and a lot of policymakers. More than 45, in more than 45 parliaments, the majority members have expressed their support for the Iranian resistance, for Madam Rajavi's 10-point plan for the future of Iran. That includes the majority members of the UK Parliament, the Italian Parliament, a large number of the French parliamentarians, a very large number of members of European Parliament, and also the support in the Jordanian Parliament, and so on and so forth. And in the US, we also enjoy very prominent support in both houses of Congress by very large numbers, in a very bipartisan way. And that's growing, because as time goes by, people realize that the Iranian regime is and remains to be a very, very big international menace, a threat not only for the Iranian people, but for the region and the world over. And they realize that there is no hope, there is no plausibility on putting hope of any improvement of the situation from within the establishment. They realize that the status quo is untenable. They realize that this regime in its entirety is despotic, and at the same time the main international state sponsor of terror. So in light of that, with the passage of time, the validity of what the Iranian resistance has been said and has been stood for has become more and more evident, and that's why the support internationally is growing.
Okay, you had mentioned about Britain and US. I just want to ask you two things. Uh, we have been hearing about Brexit, and we have been also hearing about the possibility of Mr. Donald Trump being the next US president. If Brexit happens, it has not happened yet. Legally, it may happen. If Brexit happens, how does it affect your cause? And if Donald Trump becomes the president, how does it affect your cause? Because those are two big countries which can matter a lot.
Well, I can tell you one thing. Whoever is in the White House next year this time, and about what happens to Brexit, obviously it's the prerogative of the people of England and their decision. We think there are several observations that are valid. First of all, Iran is a major source of problem for the whole Middle East and Islamic world. It's a state that sponsors terrorism, nurtures Islamic extremism. Actually, the Islamic extremism in the way that the world knows today in the contemporary history came to manifestation after the mullahs came to power in Iran in 1979. Islamic extremism and export of terror and Islamic fundamentalism is a pillar of the survival of this regime. As our resistance put this into writing in 1993 in this book called Islamic Fundamentalism, the New Global Threat. And as I said, it was 1993 that we brought this to the attention of the world, that this will be a very, very major international challenge and the main global threat. And I think time bore us out. And now people realize that this has become a very dreadful threat with no borders. So, as long as this regime is in power, you will have crises, you will have trouble, you will have insecurity, you will have turmoil in the region, because this regime recognizes no borders. No matter who's going to be in the White House or in 10 Downing Street, they have to adopt a firm policy on Iran, a policy that does not identify itself with this faction or that faction of this regime. The notion of finding some moderates or pragmatists or reformers within this regime is simply a myth. In the past 30 years, the search for moderates in this regime has been totally in vain. Many, many, many times, the Western governments, including the United States and the UK and several others, have tried their chances, and every time the results has been the same. The moderates are not to be found within this regime. So we think the only solution to the Iranian problem is the regime change by the Iranian people and by the organized resistance. So we think the right policy is to stand with the Iranian people and the resistance in their aspiration for establishing democracy and human rights, to have a free and secular and democratic Iran, which will be the harbinger of tranquility and stability in the region. So we think as long as this regime is going to be there, no matter who's going to be in the White House or who's going to be in 10 Downing Street, there has to be a firm policy that identifies itself with the Iranian people. The Iranian people's aspiration for democracy, to get rid of this regime, I think was very, very evident to the international community back in 2009, when there was this massive demonstrations in Iran that people came out in millions and billions. People's hatred for the Soviet regime was evident. People showed it in a most clear way. So we think the notion of making concessions to this regime, trying to cut a deal with this regime in hope that this regime will reciprocate in turn and will modify its behavior, is totally a misguided approach, has been counterproductive for the Iranian people and for the region and for the international community. So we think this is the right policy, and this is the policy that we are advocating.
The Supreme Leader, Mr. Ayatollah, he has been quite critical about the nuclear agreement Iran had. Even though Iran had the agreement, he was critical about USA and its intention. Basically, he is very skeptical about the West. So, if the regime change happens, will there be any more cooperation, more support for the West or their cause?
Actually, when the regime is changed by the Iranian people and the resistance, we will usher into a new era. The Iranian people will live in peace and tranquility with the rest of the world. Iran would be a land of democracy that will basically utilizes all of its resources for its own improvement and for the betterment of the welfare of its own population, which has been deprived of many of the rights under the rule of the mullahs. We would be seeking, as I said, a mutual, amicable, amiable relationship with the rest of the world for the betterment and improvement of the welfare of our own people, and as a responsible member of the international community, particularly in our turmoiled region. Iran historically has had tremendous impact in this region, not only from a geopolitical standpoint, but also from a cultural perspective, and also from a scientific perspective. Iran is a very talented country, a vast country, very resourceful country, So it can be a very, very productive member of the international community, instead of what we see today as a major antagonist of the international community as a source of turmoil. So you will see a sea change by the next regime, next government in Iran, which will be reflective of the Iranian people's desire. The Iranian people desire is to live in freedom, to live in tranquility, to use the benefits of the 21st century, to enjoy their inalienable rights, and to be much more productive and much more significant contributor to the welfare of the international community. So you will see a sea change when the big change happens in Iran.
So, actually, it's not about the West. Many countries in the Middle East itself uh, have been very skeptical of Iran. They say Iran is a threat, especially after this nuclear threat and all. So, if there is a change in the international policy for Iran, if the regime change happens, that means it changes for the Middle East also. And how does that reflect the refugee crisis situation in Europe? Because Syria especially um, has a lot to contribute in that crisis. And how does your organization feel about the crisis and the solution?
You raise a very, very key issue. I think if one looks at a little bit deeper from a historical perspective, many of the major crises that the region faces today are directly or indirectly with the conduct of the Iranian regime. Please remember, this regime has institutions which foment Islamic extremism. Revolutionary Guards Corps, the Quds Force, which is the exterior territorial arm of the Guards Corps. What is their raison d'etre? To foment unrest, to foment terrorism and extremism in the region. So, as I mentioned, Islamic extremism, Islamic fundamentalism is a pillar of the survival of this regime, and it's been institutionalized at the highest levels. And the person who oversees that is Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, which by the constitution is the Wali Faqih, the supreme leader of this whole regime. So when this regime is gone, all of this will be gone, and it will have a huge impact in basically pushing this Islamic extremist and fundamentalist groups to the fringes. The Iranian regime is like very much a metropole to these organizations, and not only stipends them, not only gives them financial help, but also they look up to it as a role model. So it has had huge impact on this issue. Now, in a specific issue of Syria, please remember that the Iranian regime is the main backer of the Syrian dictator Bashar Assad. If it were not for the Iranian regime's all-out support, militarily, financially, logistically, politically, Assad would have been gone a long time ago, and the situation in Syria would be totally different. If it were not for the Iranian regime's massive dispatch of troops in Syria, the balance of power in Syria would have been very different. Assad would have gone a long time ago, and the refugee crisis would not have been as such that we witness today. The Iranian regime today has somewhere like 70,000 of revolutionary guards and its foreign mercenaries in Syria. And I'm talking about not only about revolutionary guards, but I'm talking about dispatching Afghan refugees to Syria. I'm also talking about sending Lebanese to Syria. I'm also talking about sending various Iraqi militia groups to Syria, also dispatching Pakistanis to Syria to support Bashar Assad in his carnage of the Syrian people. Actually, if it were not for the Iranian regime's meddling in Iraq and Syria, through people like Nouri al-Maliki, the former prime minister of Iraq, and through supporting Bashar Assad, the political situation would not have been conducive for a growth of groups like ISIS or Daesh. It was the Iranian regime's policies, both in Iraq and Syria, by helping people like Assad and Maliki, who was the former prime minister of Iraq, who was the Iranian regime's puppet, who very much politically made the situation fertile for groups like Daesh to grow. So we think without, overthrow of Assad, it's inconceivable to totally crush ISIS. In a nutshell, if one is interested to find a solution for the Syrian situation, one has to get rid of Assad by evicting Iran from the region, particularly in Syria and Iraq. And here, Syria is the most important because this is like the cornerstone of the Iranian regime's regional strategy. For years and years, for 3 decades, this regime has invested in this kind of a policy of, as they say, this is the depth of the regional strategy. They say we fight it in periphery. So, and Khamenei himself has said very, very explicitly just past February when he met the families of those who were killed, the regime's agents who were killed in Syria, that if we don't fight in Syria today, if we don't fight, we have to fight our own opposition in the Iranian cities. So the Iranian regime the survival of Bashar Assad has become like tantamount to the survival of the regime, and the fate of the Iranian regime is very much pinned on the survival of Assad. And that's why this regime has invested so much on Assad and his survival. On the other hand, on the other side of the equation, the Iranian resistance has been the messenger of peace, fraternity, cooperation in the region. Just past couple of weeks ago, on June 11th, there was a night of solidarity between the Syrian people and the Iranian people, which Iranian resistance organized in our headquarters, and we had very, very prominent Syrian opposition figures and commanders of the Free Syrian Army took part. And basically the message was the enemy is the same. It's one enemy which has manifested itself in Bashar Assad and the mullahs in Tehran. So basically the people in the region are realizing that the mullahs are their enemy. What they espouse has nothing to do with Islam and its message of mercy and compassion. And they realize that the antidote is what Madam Rajavi, as a Muslim woman who is profoundly anti-fundamentalist, advocates, and there are more and more understanding of this in the region, and you see more and more cooperation with, as I said, particularly Syrian moderate opposition to that effect.
So what I get from your opinion and Madam Rajavi's point of view, that it is more a political extremism rather than religious or Islamic extremism. I mean, whoever is doing it for political purpose, not for religious or Islamic purpose.
Actually, we think they are a bunch of vulgars who are exploiting Islam as an excuse to carry out their very, very vicious and dreadful motive. Islam has nothing to do with this. Actually, in our view, they are the #1 enemy of Islam. Look, when I showed you this book about the victims of executions in Iran, please do remember who are the main victims. The victims are Muslims, men and women, practicing Muslims, young and old. The oldest person that we have documented was a 13-year-old girl was executed, a Muslim girl, for distributing leaflets in support of the People's Mujahideen in Iran. And the oldest was a 70-year-old grandmother who was also a practicing Muslim. So people have to realize that the #1 enemy of Islamic extremists are Muslims. But at the same time, the solution to this menace, which has now become global, which has now become a threat to the whole world, also comes from moderate, democratic, anti-fundamentalist Muslims who not only talk about it, but they are doing something about it. People like People's Mujahideen of Iran and leaders like Madam Rajavi, who stand up culturally, ideologically, and also practically to this threat and what it espouses. So in a sense, you are absolutely correct. Islamic extremists are the #1 enemy of Islam. They are vulgarizing this religion of compassion and mercy and tolerance. But at the same time, we think the answer is a democratic, modern, tolerant, anti-fundamentalist Islam.
Okay, so now that we come to the end part of this interview, the final thing I would like to ask you about the event you are having on July 9 in Paris, I believe. Tell us more about it.
Yeah. You see, on July 9th, you will have a major gathering called Free Iran. People will come from the world over to take part in this big event. Last year, there were some 100,000 people who took part in this event, and they will be joined by hundreds of dignitaries from literally 5 continents, parliamentarians, policymakers. Among them, a very large number of very prominent American dignitaries who will come in a bipartisan way, and also former military commanders who basically point out that 1 year after the nuclear agreement, the Iranian regime is much weaker. It lost a major strategic pillar. At the same time, this regime has not changed the course of its action. It has not reflected in the regime's change of conduct, as some people had hoped and had advocated. Some of the proponents of the deal were saying that this regime will be different. Now the reality is the regime has become more vicious. There has been more executions in 2015 in Iran compared to any other time in the past 25 years. According to Amnesty International and the UN Human Rights Special Rapporteur in Iran, there were somewhere like 1,000 executions in Iran in 2015, which, as I said, makes it the highest number of executions per capita the world over. And actually, there has been somewhere like 2,500 executions under the quote-unquote moderate President Rouhani, which is a marked increase compared to the same period under Ahmadinejad's tenure. At the same time, Iran's meddling in countries like Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, and other countries, Yemen, has intensified. The regime has stepped up its support for Bashar al-Assad. It has continued proliferation and testing of ballistic missiles which can carry nuclear warheads, which is a direct and clear violation of the UN Security Council resolutions. So basically the point is, this regime, no matter this faction or that faction, will not moderate itself. The notion of finding moderates in this regime is a mirage. This regime is a total impasse. No matter what kind of a concession is given to it, it will not be used for the betterment of the Iranian people. This regime has no way forward. The situation is deteriorating quickly for this regime. There's more and more dissent and protest by the Iranian workers, nurses, office workers who demand their rights, teachers in particular. So the time for change in Iran is fast coming. And the message to the international community would be to stand up by the Iranian people and their desire for change and their desire for freedom, and to stand up with the Iranian resistance, which very much embodies the desire of Iranian people for this change. So that's basically the message that will be emanated from Paris on July 9th. And we think 1 year after the nuclear agreement, all the facts point to this direction, that this regime hasn't changed, would not change, is incapable of changing, but the time is running against it fast because the regime is getting much, much weaker as a result of what happened. And also because it has turned into total quagmire in Syria. They cannot relinquish their support for Bashar al-Assad. On the other hand, they have not been able to secure his survival. And the regime is losing more and more of its mercenaries and its troops in Syria. So in that situation, we think it's a very important event about a very important issue at a very, very crucial juncture.
My final question to you is, how do you think Australia can contribute to a positive change in Iran as well as the Middle East?
We think Australia, like all other Western countries, should be much more vocal about the human rights in Iran. Any improved relationship with this regime should be hinged upon improvement of human rights, in particular stopping executions in Iran. we think any dealings with the Iranian companies that are directly or indirectly linked to the Revolutionary Guards should be not tolerated, because that money will not be used for the improvement of the welfare of Iranian people. It will be only plundered by the Revolutionary Guards and will be used for their nefarious conduct and their egregious conduct in the region and the suppression of Iranian people. And we also want Australia to show zero tolerance for Iranian meddling in affairs of other countries in the region, like, dispatching Revolutionary Guards to Lebanon, to Iraq, to Syria particularly. There should be zero tolerance for this kind of conduct by the Iranian regime. So, in a nutshell, we want them to be on the side of the Iranian people. In a specific practical steps, much more vocal about the human rights situation, hinge and condition any improvement of economic ties and relationship to improvement of human rights, especially stopping executions. Zero tolerance for Iranian regimes dispatching Revolutionary Guards to other countries for fomenting extremism, and also no economic ties with any company that has directly linked or indirectly linked to the Revolutionary Guards. These are the practical steps that we would like Australia, like any other Western country, to take.
I would like to thank you, sir, for giving this exclusive interview for Australia Network News and talking quite openly about various issues related to Iran and the Middle East. What is your final say?
Now, my final say is Iran is ready for change. The Iranian people have paid a huge price to be here in the fight against Islamic extremism and its metropole, which has been the mullahs regime, this religious theocracy ruling in our country. They have all the necessary elements. They have an organized resistance. They have a clear platform. They have lost 120,000 of their best sons and daughters for this cause. The very same movement that revealed the Iranian regime's clandestine nuclear weapons program. So basically, the Iranian people and the Iranian society is ready for change. It's to the betterment of the international community and for everybody's interest to be on the side of them for change, instead of pinning hopes to somehow maintaining the status quo, hoping that miraculously a more reasonable faction within this regime will emerge. That will not happen. That will not come. And I think that's the message that we would like to send from the big July 9 meeting from Paris.
Thank you.
Which, by the way, will be some Australian dignitaries will also take part. So there will be some presentation from Australia, people coming all the way from Australia to take part, which is a long way from Australia to Paris. But the event is so important to these politicians and to the Iranian Australians who live there, that are willing to do this and come all the way to express themselves for a free and democratic Iran.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.